So Rick, welcome back.
Soren, it's great to be here.
We have a lot to discuss. Things are happening in your world. But before we jump into some of the psychedelic research and updates, I really wanted to ask you a question about the vision that you had. So when you were, I think, 18 years old, which was how many years ago?
48 years ago.
48 years ago. You had a vision for the healing power of psychedelics.
Yeah.
You had a center in Santa Cruz. A lot of people thought you were a little crazy, including me when I first heard about it like 10 or 15 years ago. I'm like, they do what? That's just kind of weird. So how did you trust that vision when there was no data, there was no science, there were very few people who probably believed in you, and yet you intuitively knew and experientially might have known that something was here? And I was just curious, how did you listen to that? Was that a hard process, or was it life just saying, you have a mission, go for it?
It was a hard process, but there was some data, there was some science. So I had...
all right, Stan Grof's research?
Stan Grof's research. There was thousands of papers actually in the 50s and 60s about psychedelics that were talking about their role in the treatment of addiction, in the helping people who had cancer who were dying, and mechanisms of action. The LSD research actually helped in the discovery of the serotonin system and the neurotransmitters in the 50s and 60s. So there was an enormous amount of data, but what had happened is that there was also this leakage, you could say, from the scientific community into popular culture.
Okay.
And psychedelics became wrapped up with the counterculture movement. There was also the underground work with the CIA and the MK Ultra, the mind control research. But what animated me was having this incredibly loving family, growing up in a way at the peak of American power, and being all the different ways that I think I could feel confident. So American exceptionalism, I believe. I'm white, I'm male, I'm the firstborn child, I'm the chosen people, Jewish. I had, my family had resources. So I had pretty much everything going for me and a loving family, but I was educated about the Holocaust, which traumatized me and made me really think that you could have everything, but you could still die because of prejudice and because of hatred and dehumanization. The next step for me was the Cuban Missile Crisis and the feeling that the whole world could go up in flames, and then was the Vietnam War, where I was one of the last years of the lottery and was a draft resistor, anticipating going to jail. So I was been animated by fear and anxiety of the unconscious, of the cruelty of the human heart when we dehumanize others. And I felt like I was 4 generations of permission to do this, that, from refugees coming into America in the 1880s and the early 1900s to the American dream, being able to make a new life in a new world and be successful, and then helping me to study deeper threats. So when I was 18, and I was the first of 4 children to go to college, and I started doing LSD, and I started feeling like the ego dissolution that you get, the sense of connection. So you're losing your individual sense, but you're gaining this sense of the collectivity, that we're all part of each other. And so I felt that fundamental sense of unity and connection was the antidote to genocide, to hatred, to all different disconnection from the environment. And that if more people could have this sense of our common unity, then when we looked up at all the different ways that we're different, that we would appreciate instead of be fearful. And so I was taking a lot of LSD, feeling that this was a path forward, and I misunderstood. I thought the more LSD you take, the faster you take, the quicker you evolve. And, if only it were that easy.
You need some time to assimilate, I've heard.
And so out of my despair, I went to the guidance counselor at college. And I said, help me with my LSD trips. Now this was 1972, and the guidance counselor was sympathetic and handed me a book to read, which was Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research by Stan Grof.
Wow.
The book wasn't even published till 1975, and my guidance counselor had a manuscript copy in 1972.
Wow.
And it was reading that book. That's really where it all came together, because Stan was talking about realms of the human unconscious, about the mystical sense of connection, but he was doing it through a scientific lens. Not so much a cultural religious lens, but through a scientific lens.
He's trained as a psychiatrist, I believe, right?
Yeah, he was a psychiatrist from the Czech Republic. He's 88 right now and still going strong. But what really impressed me about that book was that it was all about healing. It was not endless philosophy or speculations about consciousness. It was all the reality check of, can we help people be more whole, be more human, overcome their fears and anxieties, feel their purpose. So it had the reality check of therapy. And reading that book and seeing that the visions and the idealism of the 60s had crashed and burned, and that Nixon was president, and Leary was the most dangerous man in America, and all these drugs were criminalized, and all the research was being shut down all over the world. And I felt like I was about to be arrested to go to jail for being a draft resistor. And so it was this despair from the world. And I thought, where is there hope? And I thought, it's in psychedelics. It's not, psychedelics is just a tool towards this deeper mystical, this deeper sense of unity and connection. And that's where hope lied.
Mysticism is what we need, and that's an access to mysticism.
And this was confirmed for me in 1983. 11 years later, when I was in touch with the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, who wrote this book, Robert Mueller was his name. It was called New Genesis, Shaping a Global Humanity. And just like after I read Stan Grof's book, I wrote a letter to him, and he responded, and I did a seminar with Stan and Joe in Halifax a week after they were married up in Man Ranch. I also reached out to the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, because his thesis in this book was that we have the United Nations to mediate conflicts between countries, but a lot of those conflicts are religious-based, and that we need a global spirituality. And the cover of his book was a picture of the Earth from space. This kind of sense that the astronauts are sharing with us as well. And so he didn't mention anything about psychedelics. And so I wrote him a letter. I felt like I was like a sailor, from a shipwreck of the world on this island. And I put a little note in a bottle and I sent it out there, and it kind of meandered to him. And he actually wrote me back. Because what I was saying was, every new way of killing gets unlimited money. From the militaries of the world. And if the theory is that we need mysticism basically as the antidote to fundamentalism, that if we need that, if psychedelics are genuine spirituality or pseudo-spirituality, either way, we should be studying that. And I asked him if he would open the door to help us open the door to psychedelic research. And he replied, and he said yes. And he introduced me to a series of mystics around the world. Brother David Steindl-Rast, Vanya Palmers, Rabbi Zalman Schachter, all of these people. And I, of course, read between the lines saying, send them MDMA, which I did. And then they took it to aid meditation and reported back to Reverend Miller. So that was the confirmation of the theory of change. That if we really can help people have this, move through all the traumas, the layers that they are traumatized and don't really see people for who they are, but through the lens of trauma and multi-generational trauma. And if we can help them be spiritualized at the same time. So I felt psychedelics is suppressed, and I have the luxury of this support from my family. So at age 18, I said, this is going to be what I do with my life. And it's kept seeming like a good idea. I'm lucky for that, my 18-year-old idea. But the other part is I learned an incredible lesson of love from my parents. So I'm the first of 4 to go to college, and middle of my freshman year of college, I call up my parents, and I'm saying, I want to drop out of college. I want to study LSD. And I want you guys to pay for it. And so that was a little bit turbulent. They sent me to a psychiatrist.
Okay, yeah.
Which I did go to. One time, the psychiatrist was going to give me all these tests. And I was, great, you'll tell me who I am, I'll learn from all these tests, I can't wait to see the results of these tests. And the psychiatrist said, we can't show you the results of these tests. This is like an x-ray into your psyche, and I have to interpret it for you. You can't see it. So I said, if I'm not going to be permitted to see these tests, I'm not going to take them. So then I was oppositional, paranoid, all these things. But when my parents finally decided that they would help, and what they said was that it's a mistake. We think you're making a big mistake, but we think you're a stubborn guy, and if we don't help you, it's going to take you longer to realize it's a mistake. And then you won't want to admit it, because who wants to say their parents are right? And the ultimate lesson of love, my dad and mother said, was that maybe you know what you need to do.
Wow.
The slightest shred of doubt, maybe you know what you need to do. And so they said they would help me even though they thought it was a mistake.
That is an act of love. That is an act of love.
And I'd say it took me about 15 years to convince them that it wasn't a mistake.
Wow, well, that is a beautiful story. And it just shows to the power of community and the power of love and the power of support, mentors or supporters.
Yeah, and my parents were very political also. Saul Alinsky was my father's hero. So they knew that I was animated by this fear of the world, and they also shared that sense that things are out of control. Einstein said our technology has exceeded our humanity. And I think that's what we're all facing. That's why I wanted to drop out of college. I felt like my mind had been developed, but my emotions, my spirituality was underdeveloped.
Got it. And so where are we at today in the research? And what's the status of things since you were here last year?
We've made a lot of progress since last year.
Okay.
We've made a lot of progress.
Big updates that seem relevant to share?
Yeah, so in the history of MAPS, so I started MAPS as a nonprofit psychedelic pharmaceutical company in 1986. So we're now 34 years. We've raised about $80 million of donations. And so we're doing right now roughly $55 million experiment, which is to see if MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder can make it through the FDA, can become a prescription medicine. So we are now about a month and a half or so away from looking at the data from our first of 2 phase 3 studies. So you do preclinical work, then you do phase 1 studies, basic safety studies with healthy volunteers. Phase 2 is where you start working with the patients and you start trying to figure out what's your treatment, what's your dose, who does this work with, who doesn't it work with. It's all about planning for phase 3. So since last year, we have now almost completed enrollment of our first of 2 phase 3 studies.
Wow.
And in April, probably, we're going to have a sneak peek at the data, an unblinded data monitoring.
They're going to show it to you this time.
Well, I'm not going to see the data. All I'm going to get is a number.
Okay.
And the number is you don't need to add anybody to your study to get statistical significance, or you need to add a certain number of people. So we will know if we're going to succeed, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, sometime in April or so.
Okay.
And so the other kinds of progress, we have been trying for 30 years to start research inside the Veterans Administration.
Wow.
Again, the idea is mainstreaming psychedelics. It's the fundamental, I think, mistake of the 60s, you could say, was self-identifying as a counterculture. And then you encourage this.
Turn out, drop in,
Now we're very close to having approval in 2 different VA systems.
Wow.
One of the psychiatrists that I've been talking to that's interested in going through our training program is a military psychiatrist at Walter Reed. He focuses on PTSD. He was just in the White House with the person that President Trump has assigned to prevent veteran suicides.
Wow.
And he told her about MDMA research, and now she wants to have a meeting.
Wow.
And it's
that's.
Since we were here last year, we spoke at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, And so now in a couple weeks, I'm speaking to 100 police officers who are part of what are called critical incident stress management teams when police are involved in shootings. We have a police psychotherapist going through our training to learn to give MDMA to other police. And I've often felt like the police are the predators and I'm the prey.
Right.
So for me to start feeling
It's very
compassion
healing.
for the police, and now I really understand how difficult of a job they have. We also have a veteran who's attempted suicide 5 times and out of despair volunteered for our study. And now he's doing really well. And he's now working as a consultant for us to reach out to Republicans.
Wow.
So he's been hanging out at the Trump Hotel. We've had conversations with Giuliani, with Steve Miller.
So the support is coming from every corner of the population, it sounds like. It's not just like a liberal thing or this thing.
Yeah, we have managed, because of the compassion for people that have suffered in the war or women who've been sexually abused. So we have support from Rebecca Mercer, whose family supported Trump and Bannon and owned Cambridge Analytica and much of Breitbart. We have support from Elizabeth Koch from the Koch family, who she says she's apolitical and not a conservative. And also all the way to George Soros, who funded a project to help us train therapists of color.
I don't think you got both of them funding pretty much anything together, as far as I know.
Well, we
That's
actually,
pretty
yes,
remarkable.
it's amazing. The Rockefellers have supported us, but in Congress, AOC actually put out a bill for psychedelic research, to facilitate psychedelic research. And Matt Gaetz from Florida is one of the main supporters of Trump in the House, and they co-sponsored the bill.
Wow.
So we've got...
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
The bill didn't make it all the way, but just, because of the way in which we've been reaching out to people who are suffering, who are highly valued by all parts of the political spectrum. It's been...
And it works.
It works. One of the things I've been criticized the most for, actually, from, I would say, our core supporters is taking money from Rebecca Mercer. And my approach has been that we need to build bridges, not burn them. And if there are... I think that's so important. And because of that, we've had really positive coverage on Fox News. And Breitbart and all the military websites. It's actually coming. And I think that we've got a very good chance of medicalizing MDMA. Other groups are moving behind with psilocybin. Ibogaine is a drug that's one of our priorities for the treatment of opiate addiction. Again, there was areas where
and you're doing it as a nonprofit. That's crazy.
Yeah, we're doing it so it's nonprofit pharma.
And how many drugs have ever made it through the system as a nonprofit? Because most of them are...
Relatively few. So when I started MAPS in 1986, I was blissfully ignorant of the fact that no drug had ever been made into a medicine by a nonprofit. But the first one that went through that way was 1999, and it was the abortion pill RU46. So it was a controversial drug, abandoned by pharma. Anything else that they did would be boycotted. And that was funded by John D. Rockefeller III, the Population Council. Warren Buffett was the main funder, and the Pritzker family and others were donors. And so that validated the whole concept.
That it's possible to raise that amount of money.
And now we have, there's a few drugs since then. We have a woman on our board of directors who's recently joined named Victoria Hale. She worked at the FDA, then she worked in for-profit pharma. She got disillusioned, and then she started nonprofit, and she got $150 million from the Gates Foundation for drugs for India, for parasites.
Oh, nice.
Victoria Hale, it was One World Institute. And then Susan Buffett, Warren Buffett's first wife, called her and said, do you want to develop low-cost contraceptives for around the world? And she got the 62 million or so from the Buffetts. And so she did both of those efforts. And then it was stressful. It was a lot of challenges. And so she started going to ayahuasca ceremonies.
To deal with the stress of...
and the ayahuasca started helping her. Now she wants to make ayahuasca into a medicine in a nonprofit context.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that is remarkable.
Yeah.
And you also said something which I had never heard before, but that so you've been doing it for trauma healing, and that you're also working on Israeli-Palestine group to create. Can you say more about create better relations or better understand each other's trauma?
Yeah. So we're focused both on individual patients for healing. We're doing a bit of work in couples therapy, but writ large, it's about reconciliation between opposing countries or cultures.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of the same principles that from couples therapy or individual therapy to cultural therapy. So it turns out that there are a small number, relatively, of Israelis and Palestinians that are getting together to do ayahuasca and to do MDMA. And this is quiet.
At the same time or different times?
No.
Okay.
Basically, though, the MDMA is to help them overcome their own traumas and the kind of built-in hatred and fear of the other. And then once they've been through that, then they go into these mixed spaces with ayahuasca.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And then eventually we may be doing work with group. Well, we're working, the first year, it's a 3-year project. We have all the funding we need for it.
Great.
The first year was interviews of all these people, why they're doing it. And one of the most poignant stories was an Israeli soldier in the ayahuasca ceremony talking about how when they played Arabic prayer music, how it had always stimulated fear in him. But now he was able to see it in a different way.
Oh, wow.
And he said all the differences melted away. Like, I'm a Jew and you're a Muslim, I'm an Israeli, you're a Palestinian, I'm oppressing you. All these things melted away, and it was just this shared humanity.
Wow.
And so the next 2 years are going to be taking a group of these people outside of the area of conflict, probably to Spain, and starting to do more controlled studies with measures about how you see the other, how you can cooperate, certain measures of trust, and then having them have these ayahuasca experiences, and then also eventually a group to have an MDMA experience as well.
And your experience with all of this is it stays, right? You follow up 6 months later, a year later, because some arguments would be like, oh yeah, that's a great experience. In that moment, you feel really loving, and then it wears off, and then you go back to your default mode network. Can you talk a little bit about what you're noticing over time, the stickiness of an experience? Yeah,
well, I'd say that's actually the most important question. I mean, you could have these unusual experiences, but do they last? What's the impact on your life? Houston Smith said there's a difference between a religious experience and a religious life. And so the integration is the important part. So the experience, and this is the same in treatment for people with PTSD, that you have these powerful experiences of opening, of healing, of letting out grief and sadness and fear, but it's the integration process that's so important to change the baseline.
Got it.
And so that's the same in these mixed spaces with these Israelis and Palestinians. It's what happens in those moments together, but what kind of bonds of friendship and connection do they develop afterwards? In our research, what we've shown is that we have a 2-month follow-up after basically it's 3 MDMA sessions, 1 month apart. Each are 8 hours long with a male-female co-therapy team, interspersed with 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions. 3 for preparation before the first, and 3 for integration after each MDMA session. And we show at the 2-month follow-up, that's the data point that the FDA is going to look at to compare therapy without MDMA versus therapy with MDMA. But the 12-month follow-up is for the insurance companies to show that it lasts. And what we show, and this is the essence of our method, is we're helping teach people to heal themselves. We're not the healers. They're the healers. We're the midwives. We're helping them go through this process, and they learn that these feelings that were so overwhelming to them, that they can process them, and that they can do that on their own after the drug. So the results at 2 months are actually not even as good as the results at 12 months. So
they get better
over time. So at the 12-month follow-up, 2/3 of chronic severe PTSD patients no longer have PTSD.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Two-thirds. And these are people who otherwise would be on drugs maybe for the rest of their life or on other forms
once you get chronic PTSD, it tends to last. I mean, people had PTSD an average of around 18 years. And so a lot of it from childhood. And so it does seem to last.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we've done a 3.5-year follow-up, which showed that the results were even slightly better, not statistically better, but and then we're now doing all of our phase 2 patients, some of whom have been treated 15 years ago. So we're doing a long-term follow-up to those people. Because the key point is that once we make it into a medicine, we need insurance to cover it.
Yes.
And it's more expensive initially than traditional pharma medicines because they just give you medicines to take. Sometimes you have to take them for decades, but if you add up the cost of that, it's way more. But what we're saying is that it's not the drug, it's the psychotherapy.
Yeah.
It's the drug-assisted psychotherapy. So there's an initial expense for the psychotherapy at the beginning. And if it lasts, then insurance companies will pay for it. So that's the key
And if you look
question.
at over a year or 2 years, this intervention is much more effective and much more cost-effective as well.
Yeah. And some people do relapse, but this veteran that I talked about that was helping reach out to Republicans as an example of how it creates a certain resiliency, a certain strength. After he was through the treatment, he was at a political rally, actually, as part of for Republicans, and he went out to his car, and there was somebody that was giving somebody else mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He saw, and so he went over to see what was going on, and it was somebody who had been shot in the chest several times by a drive-by shooting, and he took over to try to help this person, and the person died in his arms.
Wow.
And so you would think that could be gunshot wounds now, that the veteran, and luckily he called me, and I was on the phone with our lead psychiatrist, Michael Mithofer, and so he talked to him right then. He had a little bit of trouble sleeping that night. He was worried his PTSD was going to come back, but he processed it, and it didn't knock him back.
Wow.
So people learn how to be resilient and to face the new stresses of life.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm imagining there's a lot of things you're excited about. Is there one in particular and we'd love to have you back each year to continue to update us. Is there one in particular that is kind of like really pulls your heart and you think about that you're really excited to kind of move forward with?
Yeah, well, it is this MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD and really trying to make that into a medicine. But I'll just give you one story of what makes me very excited.
Okay.
There's a person that's applied to be in the study, and it's a police officer. And it's a police officer who worked in a child pornography unit.
Wow.
And it turns out that he was sexually abused himself as a child. Wow. And working in this child pornography unit and seeing some of these images and all has re-traumatized him.
Wow.
So he's now trying to volunteer to be in the study.
Wow.
So it's both reaching this us-them divide into the police, but also helping with an important problem.
Yeah.
And so that kind of healing is so important. That makes me very excited.
And you're working with every segment of the population. You're not just saying, let's just work with this segment. You can work with the police officer and whoever else might be involved in a situation. It sounds like you're very being inclusive of where trauma might exist and how to heal it.
Yeah, very much so. Actually, somehow or other, my sister, who I've been unable to persuade to do marijuana or psychedelics.
Family members tend to be that way. I don't know what it is, but,
but
not my family.
But her son is now, my nephew is now a police officer.
Wow.
And so I feel like now it's part of the family.
Yeah.
The othering that I've always done about the police, and I'm fearful, and now there's one in the family.
And that seems to be the heart of what the vision was at 18. You're circling back around, right? That vision was, how do we have a mystical experience that helps take away the othering or see beyond the othering? And if there is something our society needs right now, it's to that, right? Whatever gets us there, mysticism and beyond the othering. So I feel like it's so inspiring to hear that this vision that you had, and I know it's been a team effort.
We've got around 75 people now working for MAPS, all supported by charitable donations. We have what we call the refugees from Big Pharma. This whole group of women leadership team that run the pharmaceutical arm of what we're doing.
Wow. Well, in the last 30 seconds, is there anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah,
Anything we can do to be helpful?
idea that you can have these kind of crazy dreams that send you to a psychiatrist when you're 18 years old. Things that might seem like they'll never happen. That with persistence, if the need is there and the idea makes sense, even if there's massive opposition, over time, things can happen. And what I've seen now from being a parent, now I have children that are 25, 23, and 21, that where did the time go? You know, now they're not home. So a 20-year plan or a 30-year plan somehow doesn't seem very long now. And I think for those of us that are, I just think I'm incredibly lucky in the sense that in my own lifetime, I'm getting to see the change that I've been working for. And I think that that's very rare. Most people who work in social change movements, it's multi-generations. You can maybe push the boulder uphill a little bit, but to be able to start doing that and to see the change. So that would be the main message, not so much about psychedelics. That's just one example, but it's about this idea of having this dream and working to make it happen. And the one thing that made it so I didn't burn out is this idea of shifting from happiness from outcomes to effort. So if I was constantly like, you know, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working, I would have burnt out and given it up. But I somehow realized because the opposition was so great, because I didn't know if it would ever work, I couldn't have my happiness dependent on whether it worked.
That's beautiful. Happiness and effort.
Happiness on, and then I did a good thing today, or I had one good conversation, then I could go to bed happy.
That's beautiful. All right, Rick Doblin, everybody.
Thank you.